We have a relatively simple subject for today's daily drawing exercise, and I thought that might take some of the pressure off us, or at least off me, of trying to get a lot of detail done and allow a bit more time just for observation and working out sort of visually what we're looking at and how that's going to look on our paper, and a little more care with the overall proportions without the pressure of quite so much to actually get on the paper. So looking at basically the shapes that we've got, the way they relate to each other in terms of sizes and angles, really the only detail is this small window at the back of the church, which I'm making a bit of a dog's breakfast of, which is a phrase that we have in Australia. I don't know if anyone else has it, but it's not a flattering phrase, let me put it that way. I could have done this a bit better. It's looking like it's wobbling all over the place, this window. However, it's not going to look so bad when the rest of the church is around it, I'm sure. But I wanted to get it done so I didn't have to come back to it and perhaps rush it a bit when I didn't really have time. I'm still just trying to capture the effect of this detail. I'm not trying to draw it exactly, but try to get a pattern of the values that roughly corresponds to the actual detail of the tracery of the stonework that holds the glass in place. And so now trying to work out the width. Maybe I would have been better in this case drawing the whole width, given that it's relatively simple, and then putting the window in place, because looking at this now, the window's feeling just a little bit too big for the space. So if I were redrawing this, that's what I'd do. And I'm checking my angle to see if I join that corner up to the dot that I've placed, will the angle be the same? It's a good way of checking that our dot's in the right place. There I go. That's done, committed to. It's feeling a little bit too narrow for me as I draw it, but I'm not going to get too excited about that. And now trying to place an end here. I looked at this and worked out the eye level is very close to the ground. I'm actually on lower ground and slightly zoomed in when I took this photo at the back of this church in Tasmania. So trying to work out now, looking at basically the horizontal width of the downpipe from the corner and using that to position the corner. And then I'd probably make my next thing I would like to have the chance to do again, mistake in just not quite taking this section out quite far enough. Another 5-6 millimeters, I think, would have given me better proportion. I take it just slightly more there, but it's just not quite enough, I don't think. It seemed okay at the time, but when I go to add the details higher up, it's just not quite long enough. There wasn't room to fit the spire in quite in the right place. However, I'm relatively unaware of that at this point. So now, again, for this section I'm doing now, I'm looking at the angle. And the top, this bit I've just done there, that top right corner I've done, needs to be just to the left of the corner further below, enough that I can add this detail. It looks like it's a fireplace coming out of the wall, but I don't know for sure that it is. That could be a chimney on top, or it could just be a decorative element. It looks an odd place to have a fireplace in a church. That's the only thing that makes me wonder whether it is. And now you can see I'm lining up with what I've done already, where that corner is, to get the higher pitch of the roof that's further back, closer to the entrance of the church. I'm using a 0.1 millimeter Copic fine liner pen. and I draw on a 210 GSM drawing cartridge. It's an Australian brand called Arttech, which is a German paper that's made into large drawing pads of various sizes in Australia, in Melbourne. It's not a smooth surface, but it's not too rough either. It's really too smooth for effective watercolour. I find the pigment just doesn't have enough to hold on to, and it tends to sort of slide into piles within the water. But I find it's a great surface for drawing with pen or for using ink washes. So finishing this probable fireplace, and eye level is just above that horizontal line down the base where the building comes out slightly. And so I'm trying to remember that. Now at this point I am thinking I'll do some sort of capture for the effect of the stonework, because it is a relatively simple building, and I feel like visually the effect of the stonework does have some impact, and so I'd like to capture that. So I'm thinking at this stage as I'm drawing that, given the time is less hurried, less rushed than these normally are for me. So I'm thinking I might also add a bit of sketch marker. It is a nice bright sunny day. There are some strong shadows, and I'm feeling like the drawing may just need a little extra pizzazz, and that some value being added by the sketch markers will help. But in the meantime, I've got the spire, which I start off by having it look like it's leaning right over. So I decide to widen it on one side so that it doesn't look quite as tilting, and hoping that people will think that I'm just copying some sort of camera lens distortion effect with that slight lean that it still has, but not as bad as it was before. And this is where, when I talk about, we can often make our mistakes look less noticeable by just massaging something else in our drawing, and that's the sort of thing I mean. Just increasing the width on the left-hand side, it meant we now have a line coming down that isn't meant to be there, but to my mind that's far less obvious and has less impact to look at than to have left the tower leaning. And this is what I mean when I say if we put what we're looking at in the most correct place possible, that our brain will tend to see that and not notice the less accurate line that's still there. So I'm getting to the closer to the end of the 10 minutes. A little bit of line work to indicate the corrugated iron. Probably a bit too much, really. But it was all very blank otherwise. Now, with my sketch markers, I'm going to use my neutral grey colour. Well, it's not mine, it's Copic's neutral grey colour. I'm going to use N, which is the neutral grey code, N0, N1, N2, and N3. I'm going to use N1 for the red roof colour, and then I'm going to use N1 for the spire, N2 for the side of the spire that's in more shadow, and then N2 for the shadow on the wall. And then after I've done that, I decide to use N3 for the closest shadow, for the darkest values, just in the center at the front there. So just before I start that, just a hint of the bushes here, which I also go over with N3 at some stage. But before I do that, I now give a few faint marks to create the effect, or some of the effect, of the lines. I'm not very happy with the angles I end up doing. They're not horizontal enough. They keep a steepness going down that wall that's just a bit too much for what we're looking at. So you see me correcting them there. And again, I felt like that's going to be less obvious than leaving them in the wrong place. So when I put these vertical marks, I now put them so they align with the horizontal lines that are in the more correct place. And also now when I use the markers, I can use the markers to highlight some of the stones as we see in life, and I'll make sure that they line up to the correct angle. I won't necessarily use the lines I've drawn in place. So we're in double time now. Here I am with the N0. These inks tend to video a little bit darker than they look in life. Now, the only thing I'd do differently would be I would make this tower another value darker. Instead of doing it in N1 and then N2 just on the edge there, I would do it in N2 and N3 on the edge there. So here I am now with N2 for the shadows, my initial take on the shadows, and this is the section which I redo shortly with N3 to make it darker, because in life values do appear darker closer to us than further away, and that's values that really are the same value if we were to walk around the object, but the ones that are closer do appear darker. And so I've done those bushes, and so now, oh yeah, just a couple more lines, and now we start thinking about those stones. So what do you think? Do you think the stonework helps? It's all about trying to create the same sort of visual impact in our drawing that we see in our reference. So things that are clear and that stand out obviously in our reference, we want those things to have a somewhat corresponding visual impact in our drawing. But we don't want, say, the stonework to look more obvious in our drawing than it is in the reference, because then it creates an unreality. And so learning to just keep things in perspective, to use the word perspective a bit differently in that way, I think is quite important. And that doesn't matter whether we're making marks with fine liners or with markers. And I'm trying to get a little more variety in these. So I'm using from N0 to definitely N2. I may have done just a couple of N3 marks at the end as well. The danger is doing too much. And then we start to suddenly realize we've basically done so many stones, we feel compelled to do the last few that we've missed, and we don't really want that to happen. And just a little bit now in the shadows, and we're done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you have a go at this daily drawing exercise. This is one that you possibly could really do in 15 minutes, so why not give it a go? The photo, of course, is on my channel community page. So I hope you have fun drawing this, or whatever you end up drawing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.